Welcome to the fourth episode of A Better Conversation, a podcast put on by Better Dallas. We are joined here today by Mr. Joel Loua and, of course, the always fabulous Kyle. Say hi, Kyle.
Hey.
So this is sort of an episode where we don't have a specific topic, right? We're not talking election specifically or anything along those lines. We just want to have a conversation about what's going on in Texas politics, what's going on with the Republican Party. So just sort of jumping in, Joel, before we get going, would you mind telling our audience a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background?
Oh gosh. Is there anything interesting?
Probably not.
Yeah, probably not. Well, I'll make it as quick as I can. Yeah, my name is Joel. I live here in Dallas, Texas. I've worked on Republican politics since I was in college and kind of coming out of college. Yeah, I'm just an operative for the most part, and or pretending to be one. Married. My wife, she's amazing. We have a cat. He's okay. She's gonna want me to talk about the cat. Yeah, and just I love the great state of Texas. I love being a Republican. I love being a conservative, and just sort of working to forward our goals. Because I think ultimately that's how we make the state better. That's how we make the country better. So.
You said you're an operative. What does that mean?
Oh gosh. An operative is like a pretend word, really. All right, it's someone who wants to feel like
Sounds awesome.
Yeah, yeah. It's not the military operative. It really you make things happen, or at least you try to make things happen. Yeah. So either you're involved in campaigns or you're involved in like with PACs. Pretty much you're trying to do political things. Yeah. So
Lovely.
you're operating in the political realm. I think that's probably like the most encompassing definition of it. Yeah.
Nice.
So I would have to say, I think one of the interesting things about your background that you didn't bring up is sort of somewhat of your family story. And I bring that up in the sense of, I feel like it does give you a unique view of politics in general, but also, I guess, sort of state politics, interpersonal politics. I mean, it's a different way of starting off looking at things. Would you mind sharing with our audience a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I was born in West Africa. The country is Guinea. So if you know where Mali, Ivory Coast, everyone probably, well, most people probably know where Nigeria is. So sort of west of Nigeria, off the Atlantic coast. And Guinea was a former French colony, right? So, majority French speaking country. And that's sort of the background I'm coming out of. My family, the country is predominantly Muslim, but my family is Christian. We're a minority group in the country. We're mainly Christian. My dad was a pastor. That's what brought him to the U.S. And then, we come to the U.S., lived in Dallas for a couple of years, and then I grew up in deep red East Texas, right? And so a very conservative family coming to a very conservative state, growing up in a very conservative part of that state, and then sort of watching how things are. But with that sort of background, I'm coming out of a country that's, for the most part, pretty socialistic, I would say, or really just tyrannical as far as governance. We've had 4 presidents, and only one of them has been elected. The rest of them were soldiers. And so that's sort of what I'm coming out of. So a bunch of the stuff that I'd say Americans kind of complain about here in the country, and sort of certain policies that people have pushed for, I'd say I've kind of seen a bunch of those things come to fruition where I was coming from. And so not only does that build a gratitude for where I am, not just in the U.S. but also in Texas, but also kind of like it really makes what I'm doing more urgent, right? Because I actually, I've got living proof of what a bunch of these policies could end up turning this country into if we don't fight against them. And a bunch of these policies are things that you kind of see in left leaning states. And on and also on the flip side, if you do things the right way, your country is going to end up being good, and that's not a given, right? Both of those things are very much options, and you actually have to actively choose one or the other, and you have to keep choosing one or the other for your country to be good, or to be great, and to remain where it is.
That's fascinating. And before we get into anything else, I want to kind of unpack that a little bit. Because, we in the US, we throw around socialism, we throw around authoritarianism, we throw that around a lot. You actually firsthand experience what that looks like, boots on the ground. So when you were talking about some of the policies that we see in left leaning states, that are on the path to what you experienced in Guinea? Like, what are some of those policies?
Oh man, I would say just before that, I describe it as tyrannical now and socialism without having known what that word actually was at the time, right? But when you come here and you kind of have the contrast, you're like, oh, so that's what that was, right? And so, I mean, any policy that's essentially government top down control of things, right? Where the government controls every single aspect of your daily life. Monetary policy, from printing money and how much money is printed and how constantly the money is printed, to where your currency is so devalued that, for example, I was in Guinea over the summer, and it was more cost effective if you're an American coming in with American dollars to trade the money on the black market than it was to trade it with the federal bank.
Wow.
And so you'd actually be a fool if you didn't trade it on the streets and you just went to the bank and through the ATM, right? That comes from the country's monetary policy. Well, the country does that because for some dumb reason, they think that's the best way for it to, to create economic output. As a consequence of that, you essentially have all these kids growing up. There's a saying in West Africa, the more you study, the more you're jobless. So
Okay.
you've got a bunch of these young kids who've got bachelor degrees and master degrees, and they can't find a job anywhere.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, and so the best job security for you is to work for the government. That's wild if you're in the West.
Let me ask you, this is 10,000-foot view question. Why do you think, you said you had 4 presidents, in recent years, 3 of them were soldiers. Why do you think some countries are more resilient to that than others?
Oh man, that's a great question. I think the 2 fundamental things. One is the durability of institutions, right? And also part of it is also the American Constitution is great for all everything it sort of esteems and everything is aiming for is fantastic. To be completely honest, there are other constitutions that are even better as far as the what's written.
How dare you?
Right? And I'm a pretty big fan of the founding fathers, but just speaking just rhetorically, like what is promising? I mean, the freaking South African Constitution promises like housing for everyone, right? Like you can have a bunch of these ideals on written paper. Sure. There's one thing to just write it down. Is another thing for is it actually possible? Is it feasible? And how practical is it? And is it something that the people actually believe before it was written down? Right? And for a bunch of these countries, you've got what's written on a piece of paper, and then what they're actually more used to and what they prefer to do. Right? If I'm at least in my opinion, before the American Constitution, you had the Articles of Confederation and before that one, you essentially have these independent colonies who are living in a certain way before they even joined up to fight the British. Sure. And so there was already an expectation of what they're kind of looking for. Like, hey, this is what we're used to. We kind of want a bunch of these protections if we're gonna all of a sudden join up and make one massive country. You didn't have that in some of these other countries, and so if you're trying to essentially curtail how they're behaving now because it's written on a piece of paper, if those institutions aren't strong enough, they're just going to revert back to the way things were before.
Well, I mean, we still celebrate the Magna Carta here in the U.S., right?
Precisely,
Sort of the long-term British common law system. I mean, there's a lot that we have here in the U.S. that came over from Europe, came over from England, came over from France, that we obviously made a lot better.
Yeah.
But
Of course.
we had it. And it's funny you bring up the Constitution and how, I guess, in a degree, when you compare the U.S. Constitution to other constitutions, to other like human rights documents, ours is a lot more vague, more open to interpretation.
Lots of negative rights.
Right.
Yeah.
As opposed to other countries and other, European Union, UN, stuff like that, where, yeah, it's more detailed. It's more specific. You have an exact right to X, Y, and Z. So like one of the things like the UN talks about is like you have a right to a nation to be to be home to a nation. Well, we don't really have that in ours. We don't, it's like you have a right to belong to a particular state or anything like that. But you do have your general right to citizenship. You do have your general right to due process and all those sort of things. When you talked about you kind of have to live it before you put it into place. What was what's your experience in Guinea or any of the other African nations you want to compare that to, where they might have these great high-minded ideals in a document, but the society didn't believe that ahead of time. So,
oh, great. That's I think you've hit the nail right on the head with that one. So in Africa, with the exception of maybe I can think of 3 countries, really, maybe 5, who are exceptions. When the president is elected, he's effectively the king, and he's expected to be there for as long as as long as he wants, or as long as he's able to stay in power with the military. And so, because again, that's sort of the tradition that they're coming out of, and sure, they've had institutions that were put in place to fight against, monarchies and to establish a more democratic form of government. But those incoming institutions are only as strong as their foundation, right? If they don't have any foundation, if they're only put in place because the ruling country that was colonizing you said to do this, and you did it to get power, and now you call yourself a president, but you've been president for the past 5 elections, right? And so, and then, I mean, I don't care if you're Jesus Christ. No one wins an election by 90%.
Right.
I was about to say, winning by 90%, 99%. Yeah.
And if he doesn't win an election, he postpones the election, then he's got the military, and so no one can do anything. So you've got those type of things. So in effect, he's a king. It's just as far as the rest of the world is concerned, he can go out and say, well, we have elections. We just haven't had one in a good while. So it's one of those things.
I wonder, one of the things you also talked about that I want to circle back on, there are a lot of people in the U.S. on the left that think you can just print money indefinitely. Why can't we have free college? We can just print money. Why can't we have whatever social program you want? We can just print more money. Would you mind talking a little bit about the day-to-day effects of having that kind of monetary policy?
Well, probably a Western example of that, besides your Venezuela, obviously, is probably Argentina, and sort of some of the changes that the new president has put in to fight back against some of those things. But as far as why can't you just print money? I mean, printing money in any country is effectively, you're devaluing the currency, right? So whatever savings you have in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, those savings are worth less now than they would have been at the time. So that's a given. So you can't really defeat inflation. All you can do is really, increase the rate or decrease the rate. If you're increasing the rate as often as some of these people on the left would like, and as what you see in smaller countries, you're erasing the country's possible development by doing that. One, you can't get any foreign investment. And so your country doesn't have any capital to do anything at all because there's no backing to the money it's printing. So there's that. So the country can't even fix itself within because it doesn't have the money to fix itself within. If you're trying to bring other people into the country to fix the country, no one's going to want to come in because why would I put my money somewhere today if I can't at the very least get my money back tomorrow? If I'm getting less than my money back tomorrow, I've got the entire world to choose from. Why in the world am I going to invest money here? So those are just some of the practical effects of having massive inflation. And this applies both in Africa and in the U.S. as well, right? The U.S. can't keep borrowing money and increasing inflation, and because it has to get that money from somewhere, right? And so people aren't going to keep wanting to buy treasury bonds and whatever if there's no guarantee that they can get that money back there, as opposed to investing their money with a smaller company. And so those examples are more aggressive in poorer countries, but many of the same examples are in the U.S. as well. And those are the things that you kind of have to fight against.
So when you were saying that when you went to Guinea last, that it was better to trade with the black market than it was with the government.
Much better.
What was the difference? Why was it better to do that?
I'm not actually. So I think the way I kind of figure, the people you're trading with on the black market, they're essentially betting against the currency. They're betting that by taking your American dollars and giving you the national currency, eventually the national currency is going to devalue at a much quicker rate than the American dollars, and they can just trade that back, right? And so that's the profit mechanism. While I do think that's a bit, I don't like the idea of you betting against your own country. I think that's kind of gross. That's the only way. That's the profit mechanism.
So the exchange rate was better. So if you went to the black market, you could get more.
Much better.
Okay,
you would be stupid. Even if it meant, and I did have to do this from time to time. Even if it meant having multiple bags of cash, and having to have multiple friends with you while you go to that super shady person in the back of that store, and you sit there for about 45 minutes while he counts the money, and he doesn't even have all the money right there. He's got to call up his friend who's across the market, who he's got to go over there, get that money in the suitcase, bring it to you. You give him a few $1,000s. He gives you multiple millions in that currency, and then you and your friend kind of sneak your way out. And while you're going there and you're coming out, everyone knows exactly, they can see that you're foreign, right? So everyone knows exactly why you're coming in. They know you just left and you have a bunch of cash with you and you're a prime target. Like all that stuff is far better than going to the ATM in the capital and getting it for far less than what you would have gotten otherwise.
There, you can tell. This is kind of from when I was backpacking. You can tell how corrupt a country is by how much the people actually want to use their currency. So if they're like, no, we don't, like Southeast Asia, like, no, we don't, we just American dollars. They'll take American change. They'll take Japanese yen.
Yeah.
Anything but their own. And they got big smiles on their face. If you don't know and you go exchange,
Yeah.
they're like, "Oh, got him."
Yeah.
And then like you have this
Yeah.
pile of money in your hand. You're like, "Oh man, this is worthless. Like,
like
nobody wants this."
Disney bucks.
Yeah.
Disney bucks, yeah, Monopoly money.
So I guess a tip to everyone listening: if you ever go to a foreign country that's not in Europe, and you're exchanging American dollars for their currency, look up the official exchange rate and up that, and then ask for that as what you want back. And typically you won't be far off.
Yeah.
I think this is not financial advice. We're not giving disclosure statements on financial advice.
At least not today.
Word to the wise. Yeah, exactly. Well, one of the things I want to talk about, so, we kind of talked about this a little bit before the podcast started. Obviously, right now in Texas politics, hot number one issue is the speaker's race. Burrows v. Cook. We've got the party involved. We've got county parties involved. We've got everybody weighing in on it. To me, that'll work itself out. The interesting question, and some of the interesting questions that come off of that, I think are more worth discussing. Chief among them is, if you're an elected official, what are the things that should be the factors in your decision making? And to set some context, one of the issues in the speaker's race is whether or not elected officials are bound by the party platform, and whether elected officials should be prohibited from running as a Republican if they don't vote in favor of certain or all, or however this will be, planks of the party platform. So right now, the example is there's a plank of the Republican Party platform that says, for Speaker of the House, you must vote for whoever wins the GOP caucus vote. There are Republicans that don't want to vote for that person, who's David Cook. They want to vote for Dustin Burrows. So the question is, how much should those elected officials cede their own decision-making process to what the party comes up with at convention?
I think we have a primary process specifically for those things, and I think it's a dangerous precedent to sort of force elected officials to have to abide by party rules so long as they're going to present themselves as a member of that party during the primary. If the person doesn't live up to whatever the Republicans in that specific area decide is a Republican, they can vote him out. Sure, it's not as easy as me saying it, but I think that's a process that's sort of been laid out. I think it's sort of in a nutshell, that's where I kind of stand on that. Because you can one possible question you could ask is, well, is that member of is that elected official allowed to change parties, right? Is he allowed to change parties? Oh shoot, forget changing parties. What if he's got his own reasons for why he wants to vote against the party platform? I've typically had an issue with the plank system that the Republican Party of Texas has. What I would much prefer is that we sort of have I don't know, maybe 10 guidelines. Like, this is what a Republican is. This is what a Republican isn't. Everything else is up to debate, because the way the planks work right now, pretty much every 2 to 4 years, certain things are added, certain things are removed. And you can look at a Republican in the 1850s, a Republican in 1920, a Republican in like 1970s, and a Republican right now. And most of those would probably be rhinos, depending on which Republican you're talking to. That for me is a bit insane. It's not consistent at all. If you're going to stick by some sort of rubric for what a Republican is, I think the least the RPT can do is say, this is a Republican. and this is now Republican, and this is what Republicans either across the entire state or across the whole country agree to, and then have that as a measuring stick. But if your measuring stick is always changing every single year, depending on what the political issues are, and then you decide that this is what you're going to hold every single elected official to. Well, what if the main issues in their districts aren't actually what the party puts up as its main issues? Do you still want him elected? Does he still have a responsibility to his constituents? Or is his main focus as a Republican to make sure he does what the party wants as opposed to what his constituents want? So those questions for me kind of have to be squared before I think some of these proposals are taken seriously.
Well, because I mean, I guess on the opposite side of that, just thinking through, well, what is the role of the party then? You know, if we're going to go down to convention and we're going to have delegates from all across the state that are duly elected through the precinct conventions and Senate district conventions, all the way down there to the state convention, they're going to go down there and say, well, these are the guidelines. There are a lot of them, right? There's hundreds of planks to the Republican Party platform. But hey, these are the things that we're going to say we believe in and we want our legislators to do. Isn't it, you know, in a sense, like part of the party's job to put those guardrails up and say, you know, you need to be following these guidelines if you're going to be down in Austin representing us as a party?
I mean, like I hear that, but again, if that member of the House or like that elected official decides or the party decides they haven't sufficiently lived up to that, you can primary him. If you want, I mean, many counties do it repeatedly. You can censure the person and then primary him. You can do, I think there are a bunch of different mechanisms to do it. While sure, I agree that the party has some responsibility here. I think the primary purpose of a party is to win elections. Otherwise, a party it has besides nowadays yelling on social media, a party has no purpose if it's not to win elections because you can't effectuate policy if you're not winning elections. And so if that elected official gets you closer to winning elections, you're kind of tied to him. Either you're tied to him or you get rid of him and you try to replace him with someone else.
Well, I think the question I would have there is there's not only the party doesn't have one job. Right, there are multiple things because you could say the same thing about a candidate. Your job as a candidate to get elected. You know, oh, you got to win your campaign in order for you to do anything. But if you're an elected official, like that's just step one. You also have responsibilities to your constituents. You also have responsibilities to your own sense of morality, I would say. And then to a degree, you do have responsibility to the party that, you know, helped get you there. So from a party standpoint, you know, yeah, you've got a job to win elections, but what good is winning elections if you're sending people into office that aren't effectuating the policies that motivated forming the party in the first place?
I I think this may be a bit of putting the cart before the horse because while sure the party has multiple functions or multiple roles besides just winning elections, and similarly with the candidate, there has to be an order of priority. And so for me, it would be his personal beliefs and him actually telling the truth as far as what he believes, his constituents, the party, or really the state or the country, and then the party in sort of that order. That would be for me. That'd be what I would prefer. But putting that aside, if the policies that the party would prefer to effectuate are difficult to effectuate with that particular candidate who keeps winning, maybe those policies aren't as popular as the party would like to think they are.
Yeah. Yeah. He doesn't have it's a party bumper, but really maybe not a public bumper. You know, one thing that I really haven't heard many people say is like the fact that we have so many Republicans breaking party line is something that has made the Republican Party kind of unique lately. Like if you look at the national level, you know, you're talking about you know, getting rid of the Speaker of the House with Matt Gaetz and that whole whatever you want to kerfuffle, if you want to call it that. But and we did have a primary with Liz Cheney.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stepped outside the party lines a little too much, and just got absolutely smoked in her primary. I don't necessarily agree what's going on with down in Austin currently, but it is something that makes, I think, Republican Party unique compared to Democratic Party, where they, you know, I hear Republicans, man, Democrats stick together so well, they vote right along party lines. Really, that's just out of fear. I don't actually think that they're, you know, are very ideologically consistent. I think that they just have good enforcement mechanisms of money and seats and delivery of those uh, gifts essentially to their people. Republicans in their natural order are much more dispersed and not as organized.
I think you're spot on. I think one of my favorite examples or sort of images to illustrate this: Democrats are a machine, Republicans are renegades. In 2022, we had what, 7 Republicans
Right.
who ran against either the most popular governor in the country or the second most popular at the time, coming behind DeSantis in the country, and we had 7 Republicans who got up and ran up against him. And he won by what was like around 67%. But still, like, we look forward to running against incumbents. This is kind of who we are. We're always pushing the envelope. No one is ever conservative enough for us. And I don't actually think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's just sort of an effect of our belief systems, right? Democrats are more communal. They're more, if you kind of push their belief system to the end, you end up with socialism and communism, right? If you sort of push our belief systems to the end, you end up with a bunch of people who kind of want to be left alone, and you go back to sort of old school British conservatism and freaking just leave me the heck alone. I don't want to deal with you or your king, right?
Sure.
And so that's for me, at least, that's a bit of what our nature is. And so you end up with these type of situations where you would much rather listen to yourself, listen to your family, and then maybe listen to your community, and then maybe listen to where you're coming from. Whereas the other way is the reverse, right? It's the party, and then it's maybe your constituent, and then maybe you'll disagree, maybe, but you're kind of too afraid of the whole collective, sort of like what you're saying.
Yeah. And as we get closer, I've noted, like, as you get closer to election time, that's when maybe the importance of your constituency comes into play. Right now, election is over. So now they can play as many games, and they have a huge runway to kind of smooth things over by that time.
So I guess a challenge to go back to like the roles of the party, and the comment made, well, if this is who's getting elected, maybe your policies aren't all that popular. I go back to the founding of the Republican Party, right? When the Republican Party founded, it was not on a position that was particularly popular amongst the constituents. The sort of abolition, anti-slavery. Honestly, one of my favorite scenes from any political movie is from Lincoln.
Yeah.
And it's Lincoln in the basement talking to Tommy Lee Jones as Thaddeus Stevens. And Lincoln says something about the people, and Thaddeus Stevens says, I don't give a damn about the people. I've spent my whole life serving the people for the good of the people without really caring much what they have to say, what they think. Because and the thing is that in poli sci, I don't remember, were you a poli sci major?
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I was a poli sci major. You're taught that in poli sci. Hey, there's different ways to think about it. Is your representative merely down there executing the popular will of the constituents, or is your representative down there exercising their own judgment on behalf of those constituents, whether they agree with it or not? We deal with that all the time, where we have, like these pork barrel things that go through, where you'll have elected officials that are voting for the best interest of their constituents, may not be in the best interest of the country, but it's in the best interest of their constituents. So what role does the party have in shaping public opinion, and in sometimes being ahead of public opinion?
Man, you are just serving up these questions. I love it. I think sort of to the role of the party, right? I think similarly with the candidate, there are multiple things, and one of the things that really Democrats do a fantastic job of this, and Republicans don't do it, but we've sort of seeded this our position of making good arguments and trying to convince people ever since the 50s.
Reagan.
Yeah.
Reagan would fight the battle of ideas.
He did. And so, yeah, ever since the 50s, we left it alone during the 60s and 70s, picked it back up in the 80s, and then the late 90s, we completely abandoned it because the Democrats started went back to calling us racist. So that's sort of the way it's kind of been. Whereas in the past, right, during the time of Lincoln, and really, I would say up until the 1920s and 30s, right, up until the Great Depression, we were really into the realm of making our point and delivering good ideas. And so that's the other thing that the party has to do, right? Because for me, the main role of a party is winning elections. How it wins elections is as just as important as winning elections, right? And you can't win elections if you're not changing minds. So because the main role of a party is winning elections, the main role of a party is changing minds and continuing to change minds and continuing to get people to go from point A to point B so that they can vote for the party, right? Because ultimately, the main role of someone who's elected is to effectuate policies that make the lives of people better. You can't get there if you don't have the majority or whatever requisite number, depending on the form of government you have, you need to get those policies across. So those two kind of go hand in hand, and they can't be separated. So similarly with the Republican Party splitting from the Whig, when they did it, they weren't that popular. They had to get themselves popular enough to have the number of people necessary to get the policies where they needed to go. Now, I appreciate Reagan saying that, but to a certain extent, he can only say that so far until he doesn't have enough votes, right, to get those policies across. And so those two things, reality is still reality, no matter how you buck up against it, right? And so one of the best things you kind of want to do is let reality smack you in the face, and then you readjust and sort of readjust to what you see on the ground. So yeah, the role of a party is to win elections. And so depending on where you are, maybe if you're in a deep red place, that kind of just means you steady the ship and you try to convince enough people. If you're in a place like Dallas, maybe it means the party forgets elections for a while and goes to actually on the streets trying to change people's minds and hope to win elections in 5-10 years.
The messaging,
Exactly.
the messaging kind of matters. But I want to go back to the scene. I've been helping the people. I don't give a damn what they think. I mean, think about it like this. Every year across Texas, millions of people think the Cowboys are going to do great this year. They don't actually know.
Stop.
Well, yeah,
That
no.
hurt. That one hurt.
Yeah, we're just gonna be a Cowboys free zone. We're talking about Cowboys. They're in a saddle. So
I like what you did there.
we've talked a lot about the word the party. What is the party? Because there's lots of different ways that you can split that atom, right? So is the party the formal party apparatus of the Republican Party of Texas? Is it the Republican Party of Texas plus the county parties? Is it primary voters? Are the elected officials a part of the party? Are general election Republican voters part of the party? Is it your precinct chairs? Is it your, because part of the party is also, as you well know, the consultant class. So I guess that's my question, is when we talk about the party, what is the dang thing?
I think it depends on what you're trying to achieve.
Well, when you say the party's job is to win elections,
Yeah.
what is the party there?
Oh, well, with that one, the party there are the people who are the ones organizing the voters and advising or handpicking some of the candidates to run in certain elections, right? So the actual operations of who's getting elected where, the platforms and all those structural things, that's the party.
So would that be like the Republican Party of Texas?
Yeah.
Would that be your county parties?
Yeah. So yeah, the formal capital R Republican that has a website and it has this organization. Now, when I sort of say, well, if those guys aren't winning elections, then the party needs to go get back on the ground and changing minds. That's where that does include the formal capital R folks, but that now has to include, heck, the freaking primary voters. And even the general election voters.
Well, because that's the question that I have. Because I mean, obviously, there's the legalistic, this is what the Republican Party is. Mm-hmm. But when we talk about things like the trajectory of the Republican Party, if we talk about things like, oh, what issues does the party care about? I wonder how much really the voters are the Republican Party at that point, above and beyond the actual party apparatus itself. And I'll just use as an example.
Yeah.
The top 10 Republican legislative priorities. One of those is to ban taxpayer-funded lobbyists. And it is a passion point for a lot of your hardcore party politic type people. Mm-hmm. Go talk to a voter on the street.
No clue.
Go find somebody that votes every single general election for the Republican presidential candidate and talk to that person about what that means and if they care at all about it. Mm-hmm. So, and that's where for me it gets to the point where, yeah, that's sort of the tail wagging the dog, right? I mean, the party activists may care very deeply about that issue, but that's not going to win you elections. Donald Trump can't stand up there and say, if you elect me, I will end taxpayer funded lobbyists.
I don't know. You challenge him to that.
Well, I'm just saying, like, so what is the party in that sense?
Well, I mean, I think right there is sort of the overlap, right? There you've got the formal R party, and then the formal R party is trying to get the rest of the primary voters to care about that issue and make that issue a thing to campaign on, because most likely they've convinced enough activists slash candidates to campaign on that thing, right? As opposed to the other way around, where you actually go to the people and say, hey, what do you care about? Okay, I'm going to run on that thing, right? Some of those overlaps do exist. And part of that is really just because, well, oftentimes many people who are in the former R party are the most active among us, right? And they're the ones who present these ideas, and they're the ones who sort of let us know what they're going to run on. And there's enough of a consensus that the entire, sort of party decides that they're going to run on that. That's just, I suppose my answer to that would be, if you want that to change, and I'm saying this as if it's going to be a lot easier than it really is, but if you want some of those things to change, get more and more people involved into that process, as opposed to the selective class who, they're the exact same people who go to all the different Republican meetings. They're the exact same people, whether you are having meetings in Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, Houston. Typically, you're going to see the same faces over and over again. If you want some of those things to change, and you don't want taxpayer lobbying to be the main issue, but instead you want border control to be the main issue, and to stay the main issue, right? Get more people involved, and sort of increase that pool of ideas. I think that's typically how you kind of solve that problem.
Like the messaging on that. I kind of want to Trump made, and it was brought up before, but he made China the big issue. It was an issue before, and politicians would talk about it, but he just came out swinging about it, made it the issue. And so, yes, it would be great if every voter was informed, but the truth of it is, like, they have other interests, and they have a busy life, and I don't really think it's their responsibility to know about, public funded lobbying. I really don't think that should be something that every voter in Texas should be informed about, if that makes sense. I mean, that's the responsibility of the party to say, hey, this is the things that are affecting, we think that these are the things that are affecting your life the most. That's kind of like them doing their job, if you will.
Yeah, I think you have a good point. They shouldn't, that very niche topic shouldn't be their main focus, because it's not the main focus of their daily life. And I think for the rest of us who have some inkling into what the party, quote unquote, does, right? It kind of has to be more incumbent on us to be closer to what the everyday person actually cares about, and making that the top issue. Because like to what you're saying, what they should care about shouldn't necessarily be based on what the operatives or what the consultants' top issues are, right? Or what the candidates' top issues are. What the operation cares about, or the party cares about, should be more in line with, which constituency are we trying to, or whose votes are we trying to cater. I think typically that's what needs to decide. Like, I mean, shoot, your ideology for one thing, right? But also what you're trying to achieve. And so if X amount of people who believe these things, and they want these things, those are the votes that we want. And we believe if we get those votes, we're going to win this election and effectuate these type of policies. So if those are the people that we want, what are the things that they care about?
Yeah, and they only have so much bandwidth. Every election, there's like the top three. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I just think people don't have the bandwidth to know 5 to 10 different topics that are super important. You're going to get in the polling, you're going to get asked multiple questions. A few of them are going to get stacked on the top. And generally they're kind of the big ones. The economy, this one was the border, and then there's like a tertiary issue that's way down there below that.
Well, this is where I go back to, again, like, what is the party really? And you brought up Trump. I think that's a great example. In 2016, in the primary, Trump was not part of the Republican Party.
Yep.
Right? I mean, he came in as an outsider. That was almost part of his whole thing. And when you look at the people that voted for him especially in the early states, you had a lot of people that had never voted in a Republican Republican primary before out voting for Trump. And then you look at some of the policies that had never been the policies before.
Yeah.
Opposing free trade,
Yeah.
that had never been a policy.
Yeah.
Like there was so much that what Trump brought in 2016 that I think your party apparatus would have soundly rejected. If the election, if the party had the ability to select who the candidate was going to be in
They
2016,
would have never picked Trump.
never would have been Trump.
I mean, they tried at every turn to get rid of him. They disenfranchised voters in Colorado. I mean, everything.
So then who's the real party? Right? Because at that point, Trump comes in, he won the election. He won the election with a lot of people that were not previously Republican voters. And now all of a sudden, Trump is in charge, and Trump's policies now take more of a mainstay. So at that point, he won the election. Are Trump and his supporters the party at that point? Or are they like a strange bedfellow with the party for a limited period of time? Yeah, this is where this is where I get with like, setting aside, like, yes, there is a legal entity that is the party, but when we talk about the Republican Party and what it is, how much of it is the voters?
I think it's all the above. I think the party has to be all the above, because while Trump did bring in a bunch of voters who had never voted before, and even if you look at 2024, he brought in a bunch of voters who voted for Democrats or were happy voting for third-party candidates over and over and over and over again to make a point. Like, he brought a bunch of those people in. How long do those people stay in? We don't know, right? But those people may very well be a permanent fixture of the Republican Party. But at the same time, you do need that formal, or at least that entity that has longevity, that has always followed certain principles. And at least people like me who I'm a conservative, so I would wish for those principles to sort of bleed into the new members of the party, and for them to start believing that thing, because for me, I sincerely believe that those ideas are what progresses the country forward. But you kind of need both. You can't win elections without the people that Trump brought in. But at the same time, what are you trying to fight for if you don't have the established ideals there that have these guiding principles, that this is what we're trying to accomplish? Thanks for coming in, thanks for winning us this, but like, we're not just trying to make America great again, and that's just that lone statement. This is how we make America great again. These are the specific things that we kind of have to do to make America great again, because the Democrats themselves could also say they're trying to make they're trying to reimagine the whole country, right? So how do you decide whose ideas are better, right? Sure, you may not like the Republican Party. That's fair. That's fair enough. But as far as ideology, right, the Republican Party is the vehicle that's carrying the conservative ideology. Or at the very least, if you don't like conservatism, then the ideology that's most reflective of how the country was meant to be guided in the first place. And so, which of those two parties is trying to carry that along? That right now, it happens to be the Republican Party, and until something changes, that sort of has to be the vehicle, or at least is the likely vehicle to take things on. I think one good example is probably the NRA, right? For all the qualms about the NRA and how it does things poorly or whatever, if the NRA, and how Democrats are always attacking it, if the NRA ceased to exist, another organization would come up that does the exact same thing and for the exact same purpose, right? It's just a vehicle for an idea. That's what the Republican Party happens to be right now. There will be lots of ebbs and flows and differences, but so long as there is a need for a vehicle to carry conservative ideas, you will have the Republican Party. If they leave, you have a different party that calls itself by a different name, but it will be trying to do the same thing too.
So then this is where, going back to the Trump thing and about what is the party, you talk about what the message is. Since 2016, I think the three of us can agree that Trump has changed some of the core tenets of the Republican Party. Right there, right? China, right? Free trade, I think, is probably the clearest example.
Yep.
The reliance on tariffs, the willingness to do all of that. That was a very liberal, very Democrat thing pre-2016.
Yeah.
So the question there becomes, what role do the elected officials have in shaping the belief structure of the party, either formally, like going to convention, or as Trump did, informally, by saying, look at my voters. These are the people that elected me on this message. Y'all need to rethink some of these ideas. Like, what role do candidates and elected officials have in that process?
Think about your question. I got to adjust your mic.
My mic? Yeah. Gotcha. Did you pause it?
I'll just
Oh,
go back,
gotcha.
I'll just go back and edit it, but I can hear it. You
Like-
can't hear it, but I can hear it like scratching against your
Gotcha.
jacket. So,
That's a tough question. Well, the answer is tough. I need to find a way to kind of tailor the answer,
Well, it's a long form podcast, so it's
Yeah.
just, you got time to.
because I like the answer. I'm not sure some people may like the answer, but so say the question again, just so I can make sure I've got it.
Sure. So we talked about the effect that Trump and his election in 2016 and the new voters that he brought in, and the fact that did, and his ideas did change some of the core tenets of the Republican Party. What is that proper role for a candidate to be able to shape what the party believes, what the party is about, especially when that candidate is bringing voters in and winning elections?
Got it. I think it's a bit of both, and it kind of depends on the candidate, and this is sort of where candidate choice really plays into it, right? Here now you really have to, or you would hope that people are able to elect a candidate that's able to sort of convey what their personal beliefs are in relation to what the overarching, I guess, new ethics or new beliefs of the party are, to sort of try to get the people to change their minds, right? So take Trump and compare Trump's pro-life or pro-choice views versus a JD Vance, who's a VP, and a Ron DeSantis. Vance and Ron DeSantis are very pro-life. Trump, not so much, right? And so while, yes, they voted for Trump, they also have Vance and DeSantis in the party who are very, very popular. And these guys now, because of their charisma and just their sheer aptitude, they now have the opportunity to change the beliefs of the people within the party post-election victories. And I think, I mean, it's easier said even at their level than at convention, where sure you change some things on a piece of paper, but for example, when the pro-life issues in the Republican platform were sort of taken away during this year's RNC platform, a bunch of pro-life Christians were pretty upset at that, right? They didn't stop being pro-life, even though that changed, right? And so now, let's say there was someone as charismatic as a JD Vance and DeSantis who were pro-choice, and they came out to a bunch of Christians over. I mean, it's going to take them a long time, but they're able to sort of convince some pro-life people to be more pro-choice. That could happen. The same thing could happen in reverse. So I think it's it may not be easy as easy as changing some things on a piece of paper, but those type of things are more long lasting. Yeah, you need a Trump who is sort of against the old school party platform to come in with his votes and to change a few minds on tariffs. But if you fundamentally believe that being more free pro-trade is better for the country's longevity, even if it's not good for the past decade or decade and a half, if that's what you fundamentally believe, you come in and you sort of work to change people's minds. And for example, Trump on China, right? For me, the idea that tariffs are good generally, I fundamentally disagree with it. With that being said, if you want us to tariff China because of what they're bringing into the country, heck yeah, I'll pay extra on pretty much everything. If that means we get to go back at China for what they did during COVID, and we get to go back at them for all the fentanyl coming in through Mexico. If that's what you're proposing to me, yeah, tariffs aren't very good, but I'll take a tariff, right? So someone who conveys that message and find that happy medium, but be able to convey that message through the members of the party, I think there really is just, can you pick a good candidate, and can you pick someone who's good enough to get that message across?
So that's where there is a balance, right?
Yeah,
And
and it doesn't have to be in the middle. Yeah, balance doesn't have to be
Right.
perfectly in the middle. It's somewhere in between, and the situation dictates where in between that is.
Well, I mean, the reason that I talk about there being a balance and have a little bit of a pregnant pause on that is that, yeah, right now in Texas, there are a lot of internal tensions. There's an internal tension about, the party holding people accountable. There's also the internal tension of, hey, a lot of those people you're trying to hold accountable, they win their elections pretty easily.
Yeah,
They've been winning elections for a while. So obviously there's something that they're selling that voters want, and the party would probably be best served to kind of keep that in mind to a certain degree. But then to your point, the party should be putting pressure on those electeds to act in a way that conforms. And I guess then that's where we get to who is responsible for being the arbiter in finding that balance.
It definitely shouldn't be a piece of paper.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't, that's because that's the hard thing is that right now, I mean, we've got to try to find a way as a party to have a balance of that. And I don't know who arbitrates that. I don't know who decides that, because there are some in the party that want to take that decision away from primary voters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like that at all. It's very a Democratic Party thing to do.
I do think, and this is sort of where if we were Democrats, this would be a lot easier for us to do.
Yeah.
But you know, God's blessed us enough to be Republicans, and therefore there's certain consequences that come with that. But like your Morgan Meyer, for example, right? I want him primaried every single election cycle. Every single election cycle. With that being said, I want someone like Morgan Meyer winning that primary every single election cycle, even if it's not him, because of the nature of his district.
Yeah, the district, yeah.
It does not make sense for someone from who is more like someone from deep East Texas to be elected in the Park Cities just so the person can lose to a Democrat in the general election. Now, if the party, and by party I mean, you know, from the capital R to the voters, if that means, you know, keeping Morgan accountable every single primary, so be it. So long as, and this is the part where I can't control, we're smart enough to understand who our neighbors are. And understanding that, sure, my neighbor may not be a Republican, but he's far more likely to vote for a moderate Republican than he is, you know, someone who's well to the right of not me, Joel, but like me who lives in the Park Cities, right? Understanding that about who you're going to vote for in the primary. But with that being said, I think the same party can do the exact same thing in Beaumont, right? Speaking about a former, you know, Speaker of the House,
Right.
In a place that deep red, I don't want you to be like a Morgan Meyer. For me, there's absolutely no excuse for you to be like a Morgan Meyer. I don't really care what the rationale is. You can get that type of Republican to do the exact same thing coming from somewhere where we need them, as opposed to you who sits in this place who you're representing these type of voters and you're behaving as if you're sitting in the D+3 district.
Do you think that's what's happening right now in Austin with people are...
Yeah, and honestly, and this will probably be best addressed to Abraham George, the chair of the RPT. But I think the part, if as far as like what the party does to, you know, quote unquote hold elected officials accountable, if you want to do that, hold them accountable with the context and in relation to where they're coming from.
Yeah.
I think that would be far better served than having a one size fits all for Republicans across. For example, a Republican coming from South Texas, holy cow, you'd be an idiot to hold him to the same standards as you hold someone from Tyler, Texas. It'd be completely nuts. Like there are two sayings out. There's a saying out from South Texas: you're born Catholic and you're born Democrat. So if there are Republicans coming out of that situation, and some of them flip parties, you have to give them some leeway because they know their constituents a lot better than you sitting in Austin, a member of the party, and you're coming from, you know, North Tarrant County. Those two things just aren't comparable. So yes, sure, hold them accountable. If you want to primary all of them, absolutely fine by that. But don't pick someone who doesn't fit the district because it just doesn't make any sense. And if you lose those elections, you're going to be blaming the party again, or blaming quote unquote rhinos for why you lost in November when you could have done a better job in March picking the right person.
Yeah.
Well, but this is right. Then we go back to when you say picking the person. Well, the primary voters pick the person, right?
The
you
primary-
know,
the
like,
primary
and that's
vote,
the
yeah.
thing. You talk about somebody like Dade down in Beaumont. I mean, primary voters down in Beaumont have been picking Dade for quite a while.
Yeah.
You know, you talk about, you know, any of this, and we talk about picking a candidate. Well, right now, that's what the primary voters have done. And sometimes the primary voters, you know, and I not mean to cast any dispersions, but I'm just talking about some historical races. You look
He's casting all the dispersions.
all of them. You know, well, you look at House District 114
Yeah.
in Dallas, where it was before redistricting. That there's a seat that Republicans had held for 30 plus years. Then you've got, you know, a candidate like Jason Villalba, who is definitely a moderate Republican. and primary voters rejected him in favor of a far more conservative candidate in Lisa Luby Ryan. And then she could not carry that district in the general election. And not only could she not carry it, but then you have an incumbent there. So then the next cycle, you've got another very solid, great candidate like Luisa Del Rosal, who you would think should be able to appeal to a moderate district, but she wasn't able to pull the district. Now, some of that was tailwinds from Trump being at the top of the ticket. But I say all that to say is like, we have these primary voters that sometimes will, when you're saying pick the candidate, hey, this is what they want.
Yeah, they shoot themselves in the foot with.
Well, but I don't even know if it's fair to say shoot themselves in the foot, because again, this is the wisdom of the voters. This is what the voters wanted. It just may not have had the effect, and the shoot them in the foot logic is actually what's being used by people right now to say that those primary voters shouldn't be able to get to exercise all of that ability to choose, because the party should be able to decide, oh, you can run as a Republican, you can't run as a Republican, and sort of limit that universe.
Never blame the voters if you weren't able to convince the voters either in the primary or the general election, unless it's a third party candidate. That's my exception. That's
always blame the third party candidate.
Yeah, it's definitely hindsight's 2020, but I mean, when it comes down to it, the primary voters are the ones that turn out. It's a very small amount of people. And generally speaking, and you see nationally, people run way to the right or left of each other, and then they try to come back to the center. I don't know if that really works very well, like on House district seats. They pass up. Maybe they're not looking, and they're like, oh well, that person's a little too moderate.
Well, I think it can. I think for me, when I say like, don't blame the voters, because when it comes to these type of situations where you're talking about, in some cases, increments, right? You're talking about this is within the party, within the primary system, who's supporting which candidates and who's backing which candidates in those process, right? Yeah. And sort of going back to my message to Abraham George, right? Both at the state level, but also at the county levels, who are we backing in these specific seats to run, and who are we saying, hey, maybe it's better for you to run in this area, or maybe we should all pull our muscle towards that other person. Some of that stuff comes into play. The donors, right? The donors who've got the money, who've got the resources.
Right. Another segment of what is the Republican Party, right? The people that pay for everything.
Yeah. And they have massive influence. Right? Yeah. You can't do messaging for free. And so who gets more of the money and who gets more of the messaging, more of the money to be able to deliver their message properly. So for me, it's not the voters' fault. They chose from what they were given. And oftentimes with marketing, what you were given oftentimes is what you're given the most of. And it could just be one choice, right? If you're constantly being hammered with one person versus the other person whose flyers in your trash, you only really know one person. That's what you're going to go with.
Yeah.
And so that part, again, we're not Democrats. Otherwise, we'd be a lot better at this. But that part is where I think we, as the individual members of the party, in whatever designation you may be, we need to be a lot wiser on how we do those things.
And so one of the things that I want to give, I don't know, at least some context from my point of view, the reason that I spend so much more time talking about primary voters and what happens in the primary is because the legislature did a pretty good job of redistricting in 2021.
I agree.
And when I say, some will call it gerrymandering,
and I love it.
Probably is. We didn't see here.
Don't say
here
it
we
negatively.
Have. Well, I'm just saying over the last two election cycles, we have not seen many seats change hands because when the legislature did the redistricting, the districts they chose, pretty safe.
Yeah.
They didn't leave a lot of coin tosses up there. I'm going to use Dallas, for example. There is no Texas House district, no Senate district, no congressional district that was drawn in Dallas County that was close to a coin flip. Everybody got districts that they could win again for however many cycles.
As long as they want.
So that's why, for me, the focus has to be on the primary, because that's really where voters have a chance to actually effectuate change, if there's going to be change, or make their desires known if they want to go a different way from a prior candidate or go a different way from how the party is is I guess pointed.
Yeah. I think, I mean, this is one of the areas where I will go ahead and thank Austin for playing the game well, right? As far as just the way party games go, the redistricting was brilliant. Essentially, Austin said, Austin cut the lines and they made all the suburbs safe and all the rural areas safe and told Republicans to fight for the urban areas. And that's about the best you can do because of those three areas, you can't have all three, right? You can have two, you can have up to two. Typically, it's 1.5 in most states. And so now this is the job of the larger party in each county, the grassroots on the ground, the operatives, the Republican people in media to go and change the minds of the people in the urban areas and essentially, have a ground battle for those urban districts and see how many of those you can win. And we haven't done a very good job of that so far, in part because, or primarily because, when it comes to primaries in those areas, we're stupid. I don't know how else to say that, but we're just dumb when it comes to those areas. Again, figure out where you live, know your neighbors, and understand what they're going to vote for.
Well, but again, are you calling the primary voters stupid there?
No, I'm calling. I mean, listen, any type of Republican can and should run for whatever seat they want to run.
Right.
Now, those of us who have done, not even me specifically, right? There are many other people who have far more experience than I do and more know-how and more capital and who've been in this game for a very long time, right? So you kind of know and you're smart enough to see trends. When you see those type of things, I think wisdom sort of is incumbent upon you to be wise enough to figure out, okay, I've been in this area for a while. I've got these resources and I know how to back certain candidates. Winning a primary election is not a victory. And so again, the voters will pick from what they're given. And the way marketing typically works and the way elections typically works, if they're given something far, far more often than something else, that is their only choice. You can't blame them for that. So if you're the person who's making it easier for the voters to be presented something, make it easier for them to be presented with a different choice. But if you're making it easier for the voters in I don't know, Richardson to be presented something that would be better suited for Tyler, that's on you. The people who are there again, the parties, the donors, the grassroots folks, the consultants, all of you guys who deliver these packages to voters, right? Those are the people who I would blame. You guys are the ones presenting these candidates to Republican primary voters, and you've got a choice here. And I mean, part of this is also, who's able to pay the consultant the most money, because I get it. A lot of it is a business thing, right? And they have to keep themselves afloat or more than afloat. So there's part of that. But there are too many pieces here to just even blame monetary incentives, right?
So, and so going back to who's feeding the voters certain things, right? Mm-hmm. Generally, we're talking about the party doing that.
Yeah.
So the question that I would have, the incentive, I mean, it takes work to be a part of the party. It takes work to be a precinct chair, to go to the meetings, mm-hmm. to know the people, to learn the in and outs, to go to the conventions, all that sort of stuff. So I sort of believe that because there's that much effort that it takes to be involved in the party, your most passionate voters are going to be the ones that end up running the party, showing up, deciding what the future of the party is going to be. Mm-hmm. I have also found that generally your most passionate voters might not be the most representative of voters as a whole.
Yeah.
True. So how do we start to begin to get our party to reflect the interests and the policies that are desired by our Republican voters at full, when all of those decisions are being made by the most passionate amongst us?
Two ways for me. One, either these people who we're talking about who are presenting these candidates, right? Either they do a better job or change their priorities. Or two, because you can't really discourage someone from being involved, right? Either they change their priorities or they get better at their messaging. Because fundamentally, you can convince people who don't agree with you to agree with you. It's going to take a whole lot of time. It's going to take a whole lot of effort. It's going to take a whole lot of money. Fortunately, the people who are most passionate about these things tend to have the most energy, right? So they're of anyone, they're better positioned to be the ones who can change these minds. Again, if you're really good at winning primaries, but you're not good at winning general elections. At a certain level, there's a certain level of self reflection that has to be done, and you've got to get better at your messaging. Or maybe in the case of Lee Zeldin is one of the examples that comes to mind in New York, right? Drop some of your priorities for the sake of where you live. I think some of those things have to be serious considerations for members of our party who are super passionate, but they just happen to live in a D+15. Like if you still want to win those areas, either drop some of your priorities, or get better at your messaging. But if you keep messaging the same way and you keep fighting for on the same hills and you keep dying on the same hills, you're not really doing yourself any good besides lining the pockets of consultants, making yourself feel better during primaries, and posting a bunch of stuff on social media and defending the Republican or the Republic through social media, but not really again getting policy across.
You got to pick your battles. I will say this kind of self-reflection, just getting involved and starting to like be a precinct chair and trying to make things happen. I've already kind of become a little bit more moderate with the fact that I'm like, okay, like we actually want to win seats. We want to get some swing. Like you kind of start, I mean, I have anyway, start to self-regulate and be like, maybe that's not a realistic thing for a candidate to go out there and really support in Richardson or something.
Yeah.
All right, Kyle, I want to challenge you on that just a little bit.
Here we go.
Okay. And I want to challenge that because I want to be precise with language because I'm obsessed with this. Everybody in my life hates me for it.
So, I'm talking to a lawyer, by the way.
Right.
I'm uneducated. So, okay, here we go. The peasant against the... Okay.
No. It's not that at all. I don't believe that you have changed your beliefs or ideals. Is that fair to say? Like being a precinct chair, you talked about you've moderated some. Is it that you've actually changed what you believe, or is that you have changed what needs to be focused on in order to win elections?
The latter.
Right. And I think that's the important part. And I think that's the thing that we have to do as a party, right? You have to be core to your principles. And another thing that Joel and I were talking about at dinner, right? Like I'm Catholic. My Catholic faith is the core of my decision making. Mm-hmm. I'm also a passionate constitutionalist. And I'm going to admit there are times when those two things come into conflict, where there is something that I want the government to do because it aligns with my closely held religious beliefs. But if I can't pass constitutional muster, that's not something that should go into law. Mm-hmm. When you're talking about your own beliefs, like I don't think that you're moderate. I don't think that you're becoming more moderate. I think that you are learning how to moderate what the focus needs to be in order to win elections.
Yeah.
You're picking your battles even if your beliefs haven't changed.
Yes, and like when we went back, the messaging of it all. Is it, are you going to win over the hearts and minds of election day voters with Steve Bannon messaging? Probably not, but I love the guy, right? That's not so you got to kind of come off that a little bit.
You only watch Steve Bannon for Natalie. Let's be honest.
No, I'm going to unfollow her soon. She's a distraction.
I'll believe it when I see it.
She's a distraction.
Okay, so with that being the case, I mean, and Joel, I'm going to ask you because you've been an operative, you've been at every level of politics in the state. How do you have those conversations with elected officials and with activists on it's not a betrayal of your beliefs and your ideals if you moderate your output, you moderate your messaging in order to win?
It's a lot easier with elected officials because they've already gone through the gambit of trying to, get 50% plus one. So they kind of get it a little bit more. I think activists oftentimes kind of see it as a betrayal to what they believe in. And it's sort of the old Reagan line, right? Like if I can get 86% Republicans to agree with me, as a like I would take that as opposed to nothing, some version of that. So with the activists, that's going to be difficult. That is going to be difficult, but you always have to sort of, going back to what I was saying, what are you trying to do? we need to get better as both a Republican Party, I guess small R this time, right? More bigger tent, and also as a conservative movement, we need to do a better job of saying what are we actually trying to accomplish here, right? Is it are we trying to rah and wave flags on the bridge and make and show the Democrats hypocrisy that way everyone can see? Is that the end goal, or is that a tool in what we're trying to get what we're trying to make happen? If we're trying to effectuate policy because we believe both policy but also cultural change, right? Both of those things make the country better. Then you have to understand that in the role that you're in the area that you're in, it's going to be a different type of fight for you there than somewhere else. And so in Dallas, it may mean better jobs and a more secure city is the argument that wins here for Republicans, as opposed to East Texas, where both Democrats and Republicans are saying saying those two things, and now Republicans have to present something extra, right? And so there are different fights for different areas. And in Austin, you've got socialists and communists with literal like hammer and sickle yard signs, versus someone who's saying, "Hey, cops aren't bad," right? Cops, you joining on to the cops aren't bad argument and just staying right there doesn't mean you've all of a sudden become pro-life. It just means a more moderate Democrat is more likely going to vote for you, the Republican who's saying cops aren't bad, but you're also not flying a pro-life sign, right? That's going to be more viable for you there, as opposed to in Lufkin, Texas, where you and the Democrat are flying a pro-life sign, and now there has to be a way to differentiate between the two of you, right? And so different fights for different areas, and I think. Yeah, we need. I won't even say they need to be smarter, because I think our activists are pretty smart. I mean, for one thing, they're very wise. That's part of the reason why they believe what they believe. But we have to have a readjustment of what we're trying to do. Where are we trying to go? What's the end goal?
And so, next question, because you, I think, very, very distinctly separated candidates from activists. Do we want our activists to moderate their views? Or do we need the activists to be the raw, unvarnished version in order to hold accountable those that may be motivated to moderate a little bit too much?
Give me activists that are appropriate to the area. And
Okay.
give me the staunchest activists that can help me win this area. So the toughest activists I can possibly have in Dallas may very well be milquetoast compared to, I'm gonna keep naming East Texas cities because that's where
Yeah.
I'm from. But compared to Nacogdoches, right? You fighting for being tougher on crime and never letting up on your member of the House or shoot on city council, and that makes you that raw Republican in uptown Dallas. Could just mean, well, you're like that Democrat teacher in Tyler, Texas. So I think the role of an activist is to be that person who's always pushing the envelope. But there are different ways to push the envelope. And if you can go too far in certain areas to where you go from making people reconsider certain things to now you're just annoying and no one's listening to you, period.
And I'm super glad that you made that comparison between the Republican in Uptown might be the same as the Democrat in Nacogdoches, because the next question is, well, what is a Republican? Because if you're saying that the person that's the Republican in Uptown is a Democrat in Nacogdoches, well, where do we cross in that line? What is it that makes somebody, is the person in Uptown really a Republican at that point? Or are they a Democrat, a rhino, if you will?
Ooh.
Or is the Nacogdoches teacher a dino? I mean, what is a Republican?
Well, I think that's a great point. It's sort of like saying the Republican or the Democrat in Mississippi is a hardcore Republican in California. So there's lots of truth to those type of things. But with that being said, there's so certain things that the Republican in East Texas and the Democrat in East Texas and the Democrat in Dallas believe that the Republican in neither place believe in, right? For example, I think fundamentally a Republican believes that the U.S. Constitution needs to be respected in all, and is essentially the height of us being a law-abiding country, right? Whereas Democrat sort of take that at times and kind of let it go at times. We fundamentally believes that human freedom and human endeavors and limited government needs to be is sort of utmost of what we're trying to achieve, because fundamentally human beings do more good when they're allowed, they're given more freedoms to do good as opposed to government stepping in. Those are things that Republicans everywhere need to believe. And going back to sort of our talk on the Republican plank, right? If we had more of those like guiding principles as opposed to freaking several hundred planks, I think that would make far more sense, because those guiding principles are eternal and they're timeless, and they may change a bit here and there, but basically from Lincoln's time until now, there are a bunch of those principles that are still there, and those things aren't going away. But if you're, and so I would say if someone doesn't live by those principles, the person may not be a Republican. Now, I'm not going to say they can't run as a Republican. That's up to the voters to decide if they win or not. But that person may not be a Republican. But yeah, there should be certain guiding principles that, you know, this is what we live by and this is what we believe. And it doesn't matter if you're in New York or Dallas or Corpus Christi or wherever. If you're a Republican, you have to believe this. Or yeah, you can run if you want, but we're not going to consider you a Republican.
So this goes to, for me, politics is all about coalitions. It's coalition building. You know, in the U.S., and this is something you and I talked about before, in the U.S., we have winner-take-all elections. So we do our coalition building before the election occurs. In European countries that are, you know, plurality, you know,
France.
Yeah, like France or Greece or anywhere where it's like, okay, well, whatever percentage you get seats. They build their coalition on the back end. You know, they put together their coalition government after the elections occur. We do it beforehand. So when you talk about somebody that might be a Republican in California, but they're a Democrat in Mississippi, to me, that's a matter of, well, how much ideological purity do you have in various places on your coalition?
Yeah.
Right. If you're in Mississippi, you might have a ton of very far right Republicans that on the political spectrum, they're over there in the very red camp and they can win elections that way. So that maybe you're not somebody that fits in that very, very specific rubric. Well, now you're an outsider.
Yeah.
I think we have some of that brewing here in Texas, where we have people, you know, and you talk about people like Morgan Meyer or Angie Chin Button or, you know, Dade Phelan, people like that, where it's like, okay, well, I feel like the coalition for the Republican Party in Texas is shrinking, where we have more of this purity that's required to fit within that label as the Republican. And so the Republican coalition is now shrinking on what ideas can fall within that.
Yeah, I think to sort of to that topic, one question going back again to what are we trying to accomplish here, right? Given all the seats that we've already won at the state house level, and also at the state senate, are we still trying to gain on to add on to those seats? If we're not, then we're fine. Whether we're shrinking or not, if we're not, then we're perfectly fine. But if we're trying to win more seats in Dallas County, and we're trying to win more seats in Travis County, then we have to expand. The math doesn't work any other way, because there aren't that many moderate people period in Travis County for us to win 1/3 of the seats in that county with just the coalition of Republicans that we currently have. So that has to, the coalition that we have there has to increase. Otherwise, we're just not going to, you know, actually, because populations are always increasing or typically increasing, it's not even that we're going to say the way that we are now. We risk diminishing the lead that we have, and eventually the party just isn't as popular as it used to be. California is a perfect example, right?
And I guess my thing, and this kind of actually goes back to what Kyle was talking about earlier about, you know, moderating yourself a little bit. And it goes back to what you talked about as far as what is it that defines a Republican. I feel like it's a matter of where you're going to put that focus. If you're going to put the focus on the core beliefs that Republicans have, then you can expand the party without sacrificing your true values, your true beliefs, the core of what you are as a Republican. But if all of a sudden the litmus test for what is a Republican moves away from pro-life, pro-choice, big government, small government, individual liberty versus, you know, communism, if now all of a sudden the defining factor of whether or not you're a Republican is, do you believe in Democrats having committee chairmanships in Austin? Are you into taxpayer funded lobbying?
Careful.
Are, if all of a sudden those sort of myopic issues
Yeah.
become the light on, light off switch about whether or not you're a Republican, well, I think you are limiting your coalition, but not necessarily doing so because of core ideological reasons.
Yeah, well, I think even on stuff like tax funded lobbying or Democrat members of committee chairs. Well, I personally disagree with both of them vehemently, especially the Democrat committee chairs.
Same.
I think those things are more so.
You don't think they should have any, or you think
I don't think they should have any.
Yeah, I don't think there's.
I think you can make an argument for them having some in the 90s, maybe the early 2000s. This Democrat Party, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I don't even think they should be allowed to do, like, no. I can't think of a single committee or subcommittee that they should, shoot, part of me is thinking they shouldn't even be allowed to attend, but I know that's illegal.
I mean, correct me if
Yeah,
I'm
it's a
wrong,
bit.
but like
It's
that's
not
how.
moderating yourself. Like,
I mean, correct, but that's how the system works in Washington.
Yeah, like I'm
Right. I mean, if you're the party that's in charge, you chair all the committees.
Yeah.
That's not an unreasonable position to have.
and the argument that we don't want to be like Austin isn't good enough for me. And to serve you, saying that's not me moderating myself, by no means am I moderate at all. I'm practical. I'm practical when I want to win. I'm typically, yeah, I'm extremely conservative, and by no means am I moderate. But I want to win, and I feel like typically I have a good idea what it takes to win in specific areas. And so with stuff like that, that's more mechanism disagreements. And so it should make perfect sense for a Republican to say, yeah, I'm fine with Democrat committee members, and that person still be a Republican, because fundamentally they haven't changed what they believe, and also they may not diverge that much from the district where they're coming from and the people who voted for them. They just disagree with you on certain mechanisms. Now, when that kind of goes to well, this person is no longer Republican because they disagree with me on certain procedural issues. Again, I don't even think this is very wise. That's at that point you've sort of gone from belief systems and what this movement believes to, should we turn right or should we turn left? That's essentially what committee chair members are, that's essentially what that argument is. And those are more nuanced arguments that I don't think should define the party. But unfortunately, and I will say though, that sort of campaign against Democrat committee chairs, while I support it, that's been more of a capital R Republican push, as opposed to like the grassroots has adopted it, but as opposed to like, this is what the people wanted in the first place and we have to deliver it to them. No, the people have been convinced to want it.
Yeah.
And it's been a heck of a campaign, and I appreciate it. They convinced me to want it. Like, fair enough, but this wasn't something that the people organically wanted. This is what the members of the party wanted it, and I think those two things have to be a little bit different.
Yeah, because look, the wisdom, at least in my mind, with not having the Democrat chairs, I've changed on, right? Mm-hmm. Initially, I was fine with it, and this was 5, 6, 7 years ago. But yeah, when you look at certain things that just die on the vine because they've got the wrong chair there, okay, yes, great job by the party of pointing that out. This is an issue. This is an issue that we need to remedy, because we have too much of what we're trying to accomplish that's getting stymied for no good reason, other than somebody wants Democrats to vote for them so they can be speaker. Mm-hmm. And so, but at the same time, and this is the sort of thing, like, very much can agree with that. Very much agree that if you're somebody that's supporting Democrat chairs, yeah, that's a great primary issue, right? That's a great thing to bring up in a primary. But I don't think that sort of, to your point, procedural thing is something that defines whether or not somebody is or is not a Republican.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's an unnecessary shrinkage of the party's tent when you start doing that, as opposed to having a position where, no, the things that define you as a Republican are things like, are you for the rule of law? If you want to censure somebody for breaking the rules, do it. But I think it's too far to say, oh, we're going to just remove them from being able to be a Republican.
Yeah. Yeah. That seems a little silly to me. Even, and I hate to say this, being someone who's proudly pro-life and very staunchly so, but even on the pro-life issue, because for me, that's not fundamental to the Republican Party on the outset, right? I think even that you can have moderate Republicans who are kind of pro-life or pro-choice, sort of in between, depending on the weeks. And I would say those people can still be Republican. Now, I don't think I'd go as far as to say they're conservative, but well, I guess it depends how you define conservative. They wouldn't necessarily be conservative in my book, but Republican most definitely.
So that's where I think it becomes interesting, because I think there is a sliding scale. So if you were somebody that was coming out and saying, I want to run as a Republican, but I believe in abortion up to birth.
Oh, sheesh.
Right? So I think that there are positions that you can take that are like, no, that is absolutely completely not what a Republican is. That is a total, you're way off the spectrum on that one.
Yeah.
Now, if you're somebody that says, like Trump, right, they would be fine with 15-week abortions, which Trump has said would be fine with in the past. Okay, that's a primary issue, but I don't think that that's a disqualification from being a Republican.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you think that there are like, for example, like, I don't think you can be a communist Republican.
There's a few out there too.
But I don't, but
yeah. I mean, I suppose there are a few who call themselves communists and liberal, but yeah. But no, I agree. I think on those type of things, right? I don't even think you need to be a conservative to be a Republican, because I think the Republican brand is much broader and needs to be much broader than conservatism. One is a vehicle for the other. But yeah, there definitely has to be certain litmus tests, I suppose, or like certain gatekeeping mechanisms for, yeah, sure, tent's pretty big, but it's not that big. We kind of have to stand for something.
And so then we talk about the gatekeeping function. If you have the communist Republican, should
Thanks
they,
a lot, Kyle.
right? Yeah.
There's someone in Portland that's like, I'm a communist Republican.
That's
like,
actually that's probably factual.
Yeah.
If Ronald Reagan was running the Soviet Union, it would have worked, sort of thing. So
He turned into America point two.
if you have the communist Republican, does that person get to run in the primary as a Republican?
Yes. Honestly, even a Democrat gets to run in the primary as a Republican in my book.
Okay. So sell me on that with us also having open primaries.
I think I'm more in favor of. No, I'm in favor of both of them, both open primaries and anyone running in the primary. I think you have to trust the voters who call themselves Republican enough, and the party capital R. Well, not trust them, but you would hope they were good enough at making the case for what a Republican is, to where enough of their constituents sort of know who they are and what they believe, and they can hold someone who's running for office up to those standards. Now, a few of them will sort of go through the cracks, but yeah, I think I prefer that system over having a closed gate and then having some arbitrary rule to what a Republican is, especially if that rule keeps changing. If it was like a these are 10 things all Republicans have to be no matter what, and then everything else is up to you. If that was the case, I'd be okay with a closed primary.
Well, but so right now the closed primary changing the rules, the way it works in other states isn't necessarily that. It's you either have to register, or if you show up to an election, you have to take an oath of affiliation to the party. So that would be a closed primary. I mean, there's very practical reasons, especially in a place like Dallas, why it would be like a closed primary is not ideal.
Yeah.
But from a standpoint of, we want Republican voters in the primary, being able to suss out the Democrat in the midst, why wouldn't that be better done with a closed primary?
Well, I think a great example of that would be, let's say 2016, all these states had closed primaries. Trump doesn't win.
Yeah.
He doesn't win. Yeah, it's just so if you're a Republican and you like Trump and you like what Trump stands for, get the policies for a second. As much as I preferred the policies over some of his antics, if you like what he stands for and what he's brought to the Republican Party, that muscle, that brashness, you don't get any of that stuff if you have closed primaries. You don't get most of his voters if you have closed primaries. And so what an open primary allows you to do, it's a show of your ability to change minds. Is that, and because I mean, in Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, right? You had, I remember when the Daily Wire broke the news of the some of the nonsense that was happening with the school board meetings, right? You literally had, it was freaking phenomenal. You had Muslim women who voted Democrat, still are, there's still probably still Democrats to this day, who voted for Glenn Youngkin specifically because he was going to stand up for parents and their rights as far as, you know, how they get to take care of their kids and you know what they get to do with the school boards. You get those type of things. Yeah, that wasn't a primary, but an open primary is a demonstration of that. You're going to have people who may or may not want to, you know, vote for a Democrat later down the line, or people who specifically they don't call themselves Republicans. They may not want to call themselves Republicans, but they want that guy. And they're perfectly, and as a party, you should be fine with that. And I think an open primary is a demonstration of your ability to cross the line. Now, there's always a thing, oh, well, Democrats are going to vote in your primary, and Republicans can vote in their primary as well. And to that extent, I don't think it even happens that often, unless it's a close enough race. And if you're in a close enough race, unless you're in a pretty blue district and you're trying, you know, and the margins are close, I think typically, you know, I mean, it's gonna sound a bit harsh, but you should back yourself enough, or you should do a good enough job to make sure that your primaries aren't that close to where, you know, a few hundred Democrats are you know, affecting that race to where your opponent wins as opposed to you. So those type of things don't happen that often. When they do, I don't think the margins are that big to where a few hundred Democrats are what's you know, changing a primary result. But typically, yeah, I want Democrats, or I want anyone voting in any primary, regardless of how they may have voted in the past.
Chris, you remember when we started this podcast? We're like, I just want to like sit down and have a good conversation. And like,
Yeah.
I'm literally like spinning in my seat because I was about to speak up why I wanted a closed primary. I'm like, no, he's right. Like, he's completely right. I was completely wrong. I was way off track with that. Trump would have never been, and everything else since then would have been completely different, completely separate universe. So that's great.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I think there are really quality arguments to be made on both sides. Mm-hmm. If you're the party in power, a closed primary is what you want, because a closed primary, it does make it harder for voters to cross over and vote for the other side once they are a card carrying member of whatever party. But if you're a place like Dallas where you are not the party in charge, well, all of a sudden being able to have an open primary and bring voters over and lowering the threshold, you know, you want somebody to come over and vote for their first Republican candidate. That's a lot harder if they have to sit there and take an oath of affiliation to the Republican Party, as opposed to just standing in the Republican line to cast the vote. So, I mean, like I said, I see the argument on both sides. But after all that you were just talking about the impact the primary voter has, I mean, it seems to me that primary voters are the core of the Republican Party, because the primary voters are the ones every 2 years that get to select the candidates, that get to select based upon whatever the issues might be that they care about. They might be able to override, they do have the ability to override the party structure by adopting candidates like Trump that have beliefs that were different from what the Republican Party was otherwise. And then in the wake of that, you see the party have to react and respond to what those primary voters do. Like, the Republican Party might be the body, but the primary voters are the heart. They're the ones that are beating the drum and driving where this thing is going to go.
Yeah, and while the primary voters are the core of the party, I guess again, sort of what are we trying to accomplish, and how do we make that more possible across the board, across the state, regardless of what district it is, right? For the people who are presenting these options to the primary voters, do a better job. Because for me, it's not enough to blame the voters, and that's also what Democrats do typically, especially coming out of this election. But
well, right, because that's the thing. Well, no, but look, and I think this is, like, I'm getting kind of fired up about this, because this is a defining difference between the two political parties. Because what happened in 2016, the 2016 election, I think crystallizes it perfectly. On the Republican side, you had primary voters rejecting political dynasties, big political names, hotshot up and comers, in favor of a total outsider who, yes, was not lining up. He wouldn't take the pledge to back whatever Republican candidate would come out of it, right? Like,
Yeah.
the primary voters said, that's what I want, and that's what they selected. And the Republican Party honored what the primary voters did. On the flip side, in the Democrat primary,
Bernie Sanders.
you had Bernie Sanders, who would have absolutely won that race against Hillary, except for the super delegates, which were just
lobbyists.
right. And all the shenanigans that were played by Democrats during that primary process. And then you can fast forward, well, let's go to 2020. Like, the Democrats do the same thing, right? Bernie Sanders is probably going, look, I was sitting with a group of friends talking about how we would set up the Revolution Texas government if Bernie Sanders won the election in 2020.
Well,
right?
we missed out on that.
God Bless Texas was going to be the anthem. We were going to get the Navy fired up. We figured we could get, everywhere from here to Florida in line. We have the Gulf. We got a strong chance.
I've seen this show before.
It's a rerun. It's a rerun. But the point is that Bernie was in that commanding position in their primary. And then what happened? Obama swoops in, the party elite decide that they're going to clear the field so that Biden can be the sock puppet president. And then again this year, they lie to the Democrat voters. They refuse, like the state of Florida wouldn't even have a primary. Their party refused to do a primary. It's just going to be Biden. And then they swap in Kamala.
The machine versus the renegades.
Right. So again, you have one party that the party apparatus decides that they're going to choose who those ultimate candidates are, and that's the Democrats. And then in the Republicans, you have the party that says the primary voters, our Republican primary voters, are going to be the one that shape what our party is going to be. And I think that's a fundamental core difference.
Yeah.
That we have to fight for and honor as Republicans.
Yeah. It's also more true to what we are as Republicans. It's sort of to the earlier conversation, right? When I was saying, if you kind of trace the lineage of both sides and also like take their beliefs to the extreme, right? Like, what is the core value of, or I guess systematically what they tend to do, right? Republicans are more individualistic as far as in their relations to other people. Now, we are extremely communal. Like, we tend to be more religious. We tend to be more focused on family, small community, and patriotism. But as far as like my relation, like, East Texas doesn't give a crap about Dallas. It doesn't matter if it's Dallas Republicans or Dallas Democrats. They don't give a crap.
About us.
I don't blame them.
They sure whine about us enough.
Fine, Lubbock, right? Like, fucking Lubbock don't give a crap about Corpus Christi.
Actually, the Republican Party of Texas cares about Lubbock quite a bit right now.
Yeah. But like, but on the other side though, a Democrat. I mean, you can see this from Act Blue. Act Blue is a perfect example of this, right? How many Republicans, as much as we want the whole country to be like, I don't know, South Dakota, right? How many Republicans in Alabama give money to Republicans in Oregon, right? Rarely happens, if ever.
Yeah.
But every Texas election, we get money from Washington, from California is freaking dumping money into our elections all the time, right? This is the way they think as a party, right? It's more of the giant machine, whereas with us, again, we look forward to primary incumbents. And so I think it's these type of things happening in Texas is sort of against our nature. And I don't think it's going to bode well for us if we go down that path. Empower people to make their own choice. And if you say you trust voters, prove it and let them make that choice. And some of them won't go the way you like it. And they certainly won't go the way I like it from time to time. But yeah, I've got to trust voters and trust that their choice is their choice. And if you don't like their choice, give them a better option. Don't take that choice away from them. Except third-party candidates.
Except for, yeah.
You can have multiple choices in this lane.
Yes, here are your two choices.
Libertarians annoy me, man. Oh my God. They're fun to talk to and listen to until it comes time for general elections.
Try to order a pizza with 4 of them in a room. Never going to happen. They're just going to argue the entire time.
Freaking, oh my gosh. They're great people, just not during during primary elections. I think they're great. I think libertarians should have all the rights available to men during primary elections. But when it comes to general elections, I think until they have a decent 25% of the American electorate, I don't think I'm saying this to the camera. I don't think libertarians should be allowed to be in general
Well,
elections.
this has always been, as a Republican, and I'm a Republican and not a libertarian. But the thing that always gets me about libertarians is that they keep swinging for the top races, and it's just like you have limited resources.
Yeah.
Just go try to pick off some county offices.
Yeah.
Go try to pick off a state house here or there, and slowly
Just not
build
in
from
Texas.
there.
Just not in Texas.
Just not in Texas. Well, I'd rather have. You know what? I'd be fine swapping out some Democrats for some libertarians.
Yeah, but you're not. That's not going to happen in Texas. That's the thing. Libertarians up on the West Coast, you're likely to have that. You're not going to have that in Texas. In Texas, their choices are typically the libertarian or the closest person to the libertarian, because they're sure as heck not going to be voting for the Democrat.
That's fair. That's a good point.
Yeah. So he's a lawyer. Take what he said and run in all the states except for the South.
Well, in the last in 2016, we had a lot of third-party voters, and I think that if you look how it broke, that could have been the thing that kind of took Trump over the top. And then this last cycle, and this is Trump's campaign, he goes to the Libertarian Party.
Yeah.
It was an absolute shit show, but it was good. I mean, he essentially went there and said, "Hey, these are the things I'm going to do for you." I don't know how many votes that was worth, but typically they show up, 3 points or something like that, and they were really light this year. So maybe that was.
Oh, I think they're
converted.
I think they're fun at the national level. My issue with libertarians is the general elections in the South. In each southern, I think they're except for like the gubernatorial elections. I think they don't make enough of a difference. But I've been in too many state races where my guy has lost to a Democrat because of a freaking libertarian who got 3%.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I did see. I mean, there was I think Wisconsin Senate race.
Yeah.
Had a really strong libertarian. Third party.
And so
for sure.
it's more personal. It's not even an ideological thing. This is one of the places where I will die on this hill, but it's not a very principled hill. I'll go ahead and admit that.
Well, so I have a question specifically for you, Kyle, kind of to maybe put a bit of a bow on some of the things we've been talking about, because you're a voter, you're a precinct chair, you're an activist, right? You're part of the party. Capital R, capital Republican Party is a precinct chair, but you're also this activist and this voter. When you have a representative down in Austin or up in Washington or wherever, where do you want that person to be pulling their inspiration from? Who do you want them to be thinking about first when they're thinking about casting a vote?
I don't think anyone's ever called me an activist before, so that's kind of cool. But I'm a very utilitarian person, and so I look at it through the lens of, does this kind of move the field, the goalposts? I'm sorry, I'm a football guy. The goalposts, as far as what were the objectives that we kind of pushed for this last cycle, and I do think it is really important on. Okay, are we talking about are we talking about someone from North Dallas, or are we talking about someone from East Texas? And I do look at it like, I kind of get how they voted on that. There was a lot of, even nationally, there's a lot of break in the House. I'm like, okay, well, that guy won by half a point. You think he's gonna be able to die on the hill with Donald Trump on some of these things? No, like you gotta give him that chain to walk away a little bit. So that's I'm very utilitarian when it comes to this thing.
What about something you talked about, moving the ball? Are we advancing, or you're moving the goalpost, moving the ball down the field?
Yeah.
Or do you want your elected officials to be more focused on the things that matter to the general election voters? Or are you more worried about what's important to what's a party, like a legislative priority? Like what ball are you looking for them to move down the field?
That's a really good question. Your eye is always on the next election, really. And so I would say that the biggest things that you need to do need to have the biggest public impact. so you can go back with the messaging for the next cycle. I mean, we all know the next election cycle happens the day after the election. And so if you focus on the things that, you know, we would care about, it's not really going to be the same things that most people out here that are just like working the 9 to 5 and take their kids to soccer practice care about. So this whole infighting on, which is important to us, and I think it is actually important to the party, and does affect the people that aren't plugged in like us. We really do need to, you know, outward publicly and putting most of our time into the big ticket items, border security, safety, and just creating the environment for people to thrive.
So Joel, to put the final touch on that, could you talk a little bit about like the behind the scenes for a candidate looking at, or an elected official taking a position on a bill? How does that sausage get made when we're thinking about the different things that are going to influence that person?
Oh man, it kind of depends on the level that they're at, and so there are a few nuances there, but just generally, it's gonna be lots of incentives, right? Lots of different incentive structures. It again kind of depends on the level. If you have a county official, it could be a grandma calling them up, right? And a grandma that they've known for a while, who's got relationships with their parents. It could be at the congressional level. It could be a super PAC calls them up, right, and says, "Hey, you do X, Y, and Z. We're not going to support you for your next election." It could be angry people on social media, right? So all those things are kind of like what pulls at the heartstrings, for good or ill. But that part aside, I do wish people had more of an appreciation for this. You also have your internal party politics and the cross party politics as well, right? I'm gonna vote no on this, even though they're gonna crucify me on for the next week on Republican media if you promise me you'll vote for me on this coming down the line, and stuff like that. Or hey, I'll go with you on this, and they're gonna call me a rhino, but if you can give me that committee seat, that would be really good for either my prospects going forward, because I can add this, I can tell the voters this when I go up for re-election, or me being on that committee is gonna make X, Y, and Z easier for me. So you've got a lot of those things that kind of go on. While some of that stuff is kind of gross, I will say, sort of depending on what the elected officials' main objectives are. A lot of times, kind of like to what Kyle was saying, a lot of times you kind of get why they're doing it, and I'm kind of caught between, should we have a better appreciation for it and just kind of like let that be as part of the game, or should we hold them accountable to being more principled, even if that's part of the game, right? Because some of them can say, well, I can't exactly do what you want me to do unless I do X, Y, and Z to stay in office. But at the same time, why do we keep electing you if you don't do what we want you to do?
So I think that's a great point, and I think it ultimately boils down to what's their why, right? If you're somebody that's down there horse trading because you're trying to be in a position of power, because you want to have a certain committee spot, okay, that's not acceptable. If you're down there horse trading because you're trying to protect your seat, I don't think that that's acceptable. If you're down there horse trading because you're trying to move the ball on other issues, and if you're willing to have that back and forth because you're going to invest a little bit here, but your more return's going to be higher. Okay, I'll go with you on this bill, but I really care about school choice, so you go with me on school choice. I honestly think that voters are by and large fine with that. I think where people think it's gross or have a problem when it's like, okay, I'll do this for you now, but next cycle I want this committee chair seat. I think that's where people start having a problem with it.
So how do voters then know what the why is?
That you got to ask. This is why we have a better conversation, because they're
Come in with
elected
your
officials.
questions.
Because they're elected officials can come on a better conversation and they can ask these questions. But no, that's a great.
Yeah.
That's why our officials should be held accountable to appearing in debates. They should be held accountable for doing, town halls or speaking events within their district. They should be out there communicating with their voters and letting their constituents make a value judgment themselves, about whether this person is being right or wrong. It's also, I hate to say, kind of the job of the media, right? You're supposed to have political media that covers that stuff, that's not covering who's sleeping with whom and how drunk people are, that are covering that sort of thing, that have the insider knowledge about, oh, this person actually doesn't give a rip about this, but they're really trying to get on the jurisprudence committee next year, or whatever the case may be. So that's what those things are supposed to be there for. That's why we have them.
Yeah.
But again, to the point earlier, you know, if we have safe generals and all somebody has to do is get through a primary, maybe you don't need to worry about some of that stuff. Maybe you can kind of skip the debate and skip this and skip that because you have a safely drawn district.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's a fair point. I still do want safe generals. I think the most
This is why you were advocating for primaries.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. The most expedient way for you to fix that is to make the primaries as difficult as possible. That way, the person is vetted before they get to the general, because the general is so much of a toss up for me.
Right.
I would much rather the person, you know, be put through the ringer, even if he makes it through the primary, than, you know, we no longer get. And it's not even like yes, it is a Republican versus Democrat thing because I am a Republican, but it's not just that for the sake of the party. It's also because regardless of how much of a rhino you think he is, that Republican elected official is going to be more accountable to Republicans than he will be Democrats. And it really doesn't matter how much in the middle and how moderate of a Republican he is. So long as there's a primary process, he is still accountable to Republican primary voters as opposed to Democrat voters. And even excluding that, he's still accountable to, his volunteer base is going to be, for the most part, Republicans. His donor base is going to be, for the most part, people who, if they're not socially conservative, they're going to be Chamber of Commerce Republicans who still have to align with him on the economic stuff. Like, he's far and large more accountable to Republicans and Democrats. And so I don't care how conservative the Democrat is, I will forever be more in favor of a moderate Republican over the most conservative Democrat because of who he's accountable for, not simply for the party game. I do enjoy the party game, but it's not just for the party game.
Well, Joel, I appreciate you coming on with us.
Absolutely. It was fun.
Sharing your wisdom, sharing your perspective. These are not easy questions. And for those of you that are watching, I hope you disagreed with us at times. And we want to hear from you if you did. We want to hear from you in the comments. We want you to follow us on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, on X, A Better Dallas. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you think. Because, again, my position is our primary voters are the heart and soul of the Republican Party. And when their voices are ignored, it's for the detriment and the doom of the party as a whole. Mm-hmm. So thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Like, share, subscribe, tell your friends about A Better Conversation. Kyle, as always, thank you for your expert guidance, stewardship, captaining of the ship. I don't know, what's the right Navy term?
Yeah, that would be all the ones that
the
you said.
right Navy term for that. Join us again in the future and have a good evening.